that recording? So we're recording. So welcome everyone to the webinar on the Econoliser project. Here today we've got Dr. John Sumner and Dr. Andreas Kermeyer to talk about the trials that were conducted using the Econoliser knife sterilisation unit. And we'll have time for questions. That we'll talk for about 40 minutes, and then there'll be time for questions, 20 minutes of questions at the end. We've also got Robin Adair from AirTech, which is the manufacturer of the Econoliser unit, who can answer some questions at the end as well. So save your questions up for them. So just before we start, before I hand over to Andreas, just like to just recap what this project was about. So essentially reducing water and energy consumption, primarily on the slaughter floor, as the Econolisers are already a proven and commercialised piece of equipment for knife sterilisation that comes from the United Kingdom. And this trial in Australia was conducted at 3 different sites and investigated a number of things around the Econoliser, such as learning from the practical application of the unit in an Australian context. And also there was a tool developed around energy and water savings, and then of course the microbiological validation that the team here will talk about as well. So we've got a few things to cover in that time. So I'd like to hand over to Andreas. Thanks.
Thanks, Matt. Now I'll just go and share my screen, and we've got some slides here. So you should all be able to see, hopefully, the title slide of our presentation, which will be a tag team effort between me and John. And we, however, don't want to forget our colleague Jessica Jolly, who helped manage and organise a lot of these things. And as it turns out, the Jolly clan has just expanded about a week ago with the arrival of Chloe Naomi Jolly, and both of them are doing well. And Jess is certainly sending a love to everyone to say that they're all excellent. Now, in terms of our presentation today, we'll cover what the Econoliser twin knife steriliser is in broad principles, broad terms, and like Matt said, Robin's on the line who can answer some questions at the end about specifics. We'll talk about the implant micro trials that we've undertaken, demonstrate the what we call the adoption guidance tool, which is all about calculating water, energy and emission usage between the continuous knife steriliser and the Econoliser twin knife steriliser, and then we've got the questions. So first of all, what is the Econoliser unit? So actually, Econoliser is not just one unit, it's a range of tools that have been designed for sanitising slaughter equipment. So it covers knives, but also air knives, hot cutters, splitting saws, and so on, though we've only looked at the twin knife system as part of this trial. They are alternatives to your traditional continuous flow sterilisers, and what's so good or what's so unique about them is that they use considerably less water and energy, because the water is only used when the knife is actually in the steriliser unit and the unit is activated. So it takes about 140 ml through a 4.5 second activation of the unit, and that's a factory setting that depending on the application can actually be changed. So that water is still at a minimum of 82 degrees Celsius, but that water is heated essentially on demand just before it's actually used. So therefore, you can already imagine that you use a lot less water than what you have in a continuous flow, and you don't have to heat all that water. Matt's also mentioned that the Econoliser and Robin here from AirTech Distribution in the UK, and you've got a link there if you want to check out more about some of their other products. Now, this is basically what the unit looks like. On the left here, we've got, let me just see if I can change the pointer here. We've got the unit in the middle here, which is the twin knife unit. And on the left here, we've got it mounted on a mounting column together with the display, which we've got shown on the right-hand side. And I say display because on this particular unit, there is a temperature display, which is an optional item to it. It's got the control box for turning on, turning off, and if you needed to get into it, various settings to be changed. That particular display at the top for the temperature was quite useful during the trial because it always shows you that, you know, the unit's ready to go. In terms of the requirements for using it, it can work with cold, warm, so hand washing water, or even the 82-degree sterilizer hot water. The Econoliser's got a small water reservoir with a heating element, so it doesn't matter what temperature of water you're using, it can always reach that minimum of 82, and usually it's set a bit higher as well. The one thing that it does need is electricity to do the water heating, of course, and it also requires a minimum of 35 psi water pressure. It does contain a regulator to make sure that nothing blows in the unit. And with respect to that 35 psi, as we found out during the trial, most plant engineers will tell you, we've got 7 bar at the pump, we can get that pressure, no problem. But it's really getting that pressure at that particular point in time, because all your sterilizers and all the other water that you're using throughout your slaughter line, they're all bleeding off pressure. And so that can at times be a challenge. There's a little bit of operator training required. It probably took about 5 seconds to essentially inform the operator that when they insert the knife into the unit, they just have to press down to activate the unit and the spray. So if we have a look at what this actually looks like, on the left-hand side here, we've got a view from the top with the lid up. The 2 knives are inserted and there's a little pressure switch. And let's hope that this works when I go and show you this quick video of activating the sprays here. So on this particular video, this is a little pressure gauge that was supplied as part of the trial units by AirTech. It clips into the unit here. It's a very quick swapping mechanism. And we can just see that it measures the pressure to make sure that we actually got the pressure during the trial. And here we got just over 35 psi. Oops. And here a quick video to show what the unit looks like in operation on a sheep slaughter line. And you could see that this particular operator, because of the Y cut, which was obviously very woolly, there was wool fragments on the knife left, and because of the speed of the line, they were just putting the knives into either the sterilizer or the Econoliser. So he was removing some of that extra fleece and wool strands before he put it into the actual Econoliser unit, and then a very light press down on the knife handle to activate the sprays while he removes the other knife to do the next animal. Now we'll come back to that particular operation and the effects of rinsing your knife beforehand, which it'll just clog up a sterilizer, and it doesn't do the Econoliser any good either. So what were the in-plant trials? I'll hand over to John, and coming off mute. It's like a joke of the Welshman, the Irishman, and the German walking into an abattoir to do some plant trials with the Econoliser. John, are you there?
I am. Is this okay?
Lovely.
Okay. My job was to be the bug hunter, to find out how many bacteria were left on the knife after it had been through the cleaning system, either through the sterilizer or through the Econoliser. And ideally, of course, the knives should be sterile because we put them in a sterilizer, don't we? But that's not right. There's always something left on the knife after it's been through either the sterilizer or the Econoliser. Maybe not much, but sometimes quite a lot. So we usually count 25 knives. And you can see that if we're going to be equivalent, and if you want to install these machines, you have to prove equivalence to the sterilizer at that station, so that DAF will allow you to use the Econoliser. So you're looking at counts on knives very similar or better than the counts you're getting on the sterilizer. Representative sample, and a good number is 25 to 30, and we did 25. We counted the total number of bacteria per square centimeter of knife blade. So you have to calculate the area of the knife. Some are skinny little knives and others have a lot more area of blade, and bring the count back to square centimeter. You go, Andreas. I'm being controlled from the Adelaide Hills. Matthew said we did 3 plants, and they each had installed 2 Econolizers. And the first one was a beef plant that ran at 1.5 animals a minute. And at that plant, they had installed them at flanking and in the boning room at the 4/4 pre-trim. We were assured that there would be ample pressure, but there wasn't. That's a shame. Their sterilizers overflowed at about 2 liters a minute. And you see that that's good, because in the next plant, they overflowed at 6 liters a minute. And in this beef plant, they ran at 2 a minute, a bit faster. And the machines were installed at the first leg and the bung. Now they did get 35 psi. And in the third one, which was a sheep plant running at over 9 a minute, they installed an Econoliser at the Y-cut and at the retain rail. They got 35 psi, and you'll see that at the station that Andreas showed you in the lead-in, we had to reduce the Econoliser spray to 3 seconds to allow the rinsing of the knife. And in a minute, you'll see the carnage on the floor and in the sterilizer with wool pieces. And their sterilizers ran at 4 liters a minute. Okay, Andreas. What we do is to swab the knife blade with a sterile sponge after it's either been in the sterilizer or the Econoliser. And we do 25 in each system. And we split it, so we did sort of 12 in the morning and 13 in the afternoon, so that we got different lots going through. And as you can see, we do the total count and E. coli. Now, we only found E. coli twice in 300 knives, on 300 knives. And in each case, it was 1 colony on the Petri film. So it worked out at far less than 1 E. coli per square centimeter. And so we compared the two systems. It's a work of art. I'll just go on a bit, Andreas, before you change, because I want to show the wool, which is all over the sterilizer and all over the floor. Now you can see the sterilizer, when this was taken, is overflowing from its central overflow pipe. That was unusual because it kept getting clogged up with wool and overflowing over the top. So when they pulled the knife out, they were pulling it out through the wool. And they've got a nice long piece of wire that's used constantly almost to free up that central overflow tube. So in a sheep plant, that's a very challenging place to get your knives really clean, and especially for the Econoliser. The chain's going quickly. You've only got 3 seconds in the Econoliser. So it really was up against it. Thanks, Andreas. And the next one, yep. Now in this, and there on the right, you can see another shot of all the wool. There, the sterilizer's overflowing from the top. You can see from the middle, you've got 6 seconds to do everything. And the knife, the second knife, had 4 to 5 seconds, but the Econoliser only had 3 seconds, and that allowed us to get the knife rinsed before the operator put it in there. Now they wouldn't normally do that, but they soon did it. They get into a routine pretty well. Fortunately, the pressure was 35 psi. Now on the left, and the next one, Andreas. Give me the bottom one. Yep. So on the left, we've got a system of showing the bug counts, where you show it what every knife, the category that every knife came into. So you can see on the left, only one knife in the Econoliser had less than 1 per square centimeter, and almost all of them had between 1 and 10 per square centimeter. And we'd think that's high, and you will as well when you see some of the other scenarios. The sterilizer was a bit worse, and most of their counts were between 11 and 100 per square centimeter. So you could say there was equivalence, but it's a sort of a Pyrrhic victory. It's not much of a victory because the counts are high.
John, can I just clarify that these are actually the number of organisms on the knife blade, not per square centimeter?
Ah, is it?
I'm pretty sure that, yes.
Well,
that's what they were.
All right, all right. Carrying on. Here's the pre-trim in a beef abattoir. Now, they were running them into the boning room at about 2.5 sides a minute. So you've got about 20 odd seconds between each one. It's a 2-knife system, so the non-use knife has a long time in the sterilizer. The Econoliser had 4.5 seconds, but it was only getting 24 psi. And if you see the results, Andreas, you can see that on the left, the sterilizer had a higher proportion of knife counts, either 0 or less than 1. So didn't get equivalence there. And we noticed that small pieces of fat and meat were on the blades of both knives, but rather more often on the Econoliser knife. You want to say anything, Andreas, before we move on?
No, it just, like you say, it was a I'll say fatty type of operation, and both of those systems had some, I don't know, trouble coping with it, but it's just that residual fat that was there.
Okay, next one, number 3. This is at the same abattoir, and we're up at flanking now on the slaughter floor. And 1.5 head a minute. Knife the flanker, she was very good. She opened up with the knife and then rinsed it and put it in the sterilizer or the Econoliser. And then she did some clearing with an air knife. So the knife in the sterilizer had a nice long time, about 10 seconds or more, while she was working the air knife. And the Econo had 4.5 seconds, and it only got 24 psi. We wish it had more. And the next bit, Andreas. Even so, you could say there was equivalence there, because the Econoliser and the sterilizer knives had very similar ranges in their counts. Next one. Gone to a different abattoir now, and we're up on the legging stand, where there were, I think, four. Were there 4 leggers, Andreas, and they swapped over and did a different job?
Yep, that's right.
We were with the second one that was doing a lot of clearing, so a lot of knife work, clearing the hide backwards. They were going at 2 head a minute, and the non-use knife had 10 seconds, and the Econo had 4.5 seconds. And they were supplying 35 psi. And you can see the difference on the left there. All those Econo counts are either 0, we couldn't get any, or less than 1. And so you could see equivalence there. If they wish to apply to DAF, they'd be all right. Bunging, up on the bunging stand, not much room, and there were 3 of us up there. It's always a trial to stay sterile with the sponge. And Andreas always prepares the sponge for me. And those of you who do ESAM counts know about this. You've got to strip the moisture out of the sponge and expose just the tip of it out of the bag. And then I come along with my sterile right hand and take the sponge, run it along both sides of the knife and the back of the knife, and put it back in the bag. So it's a bit of a work of art, especially on a fast-moving sheep line. Anyway, on this one we had plenty of time because when he had ringed the bung, he then came across, got his bag, rubber band, and bagged the bung. So his second knife had 15 seconds, and the Econo had 4.5. But it had 4.5 and 35 psi. So you can see from the graph on the left there that it all came out very nicely, and that almost all the counts were either 0 or less than 1, and that was for both systems. And so there was equivalence there as well. Yes, okay. Number 6. This was entirely different. This was retain rail on the sheep plant that we started with. Now the operator went around carcasses on the rail and took suspect bits off, bits of wool or bits of anything that he wanted to. He had a single knife, and when he'd done what he was going to do, he came back to the sterilizer, gave it a dip. He rinsed, sorry, gave it a dip, and then went back again. Now the Econo got 4.5 seconds, and the pressure on the line was 35. You can see that worked out just fine. With there was certainly equivalence, or perhaps you'd say the Econoliser was superior. So that was the small stock plant. What did we learn? Well, we learned the pressure is king. If you don't have 35 psi where you put your Econoliser, it's not going to work too well. You're not giving it every chance. We learned that high-speed sheep lines are a major challenge, especially if you're going to put it right at the beginning where there are lots of cuts through the pelt, and so lots of wool coming back on that knife. And you can see that unless they rinse before putting it in the Econoliser, those insertion ports get crapped up. Econoliser did very well when you had 35 psi, very well, going through the beef hide and around the bung. They are high contamination stations and it worked just fine, providing it's pre-rinsed. And there's no reason why it shouldn't be. And the same goes for the Y-cut. And finally, Andreas said early on, they cotton on pretty quickly. You can make a change and they don't want to do it, but they'll do it quickly and they'll do it well. So that's it for me. I look forward to coming back to you with the questions. And now back to Andreas for the money shot. And in this case, the money shot is about money.
Well, just in addition to that comment about the operators, there was at several places, you might recall that earlier picture of the Econoliser with the lid up, because there's a stainless steel activator, and the actual holes in the top, they come in different sizes to accommodate different size knives. Some of the operators were just nervous when they first put the knives in about, oh, there's my knife against stainless steel, it's going to blunt it and all that. Didn't work out that way for them in the end. I mean, they all adopted very quickly, and it kind of, okay, this is just, you know, I'm not trying to scrape my knife blade against the stainless steel. That's really just there to catch the handle and then get activated. So that sort of fear was fairly quickly alleviated. All right, now in terms of the money shot, as John said, we've prepared a Excel-based adoption guidance tool, and it's really there to help you guys make an evaluation of your sterilizer versus the Econoliser. Now, at this stage, it is only for the knife sterilizers. So because we haven't included ear knives or hot cutters as part of this trial, though if we needed to, that could be extended. And while we haven't specifically included it, you can, based on the outputs from this, you can work out what a payback time would actually be. Now, the focus of that tool is on water usage, on energy usage, and on CO2 equivalent emissions. And for that reason, we've used the National Greenhouse and Energy Reporting Determination from 2008 with the latest update from 2023. And that has included in it various heating sources that people might be using. And I think all plants will use one or another of those heating sources for heating up their water. So that way it ties in with your emissions reporting requirements and so on. So it's not something new or something super novel that we've done that doesn't fit in with anywhere. This should all tie in quite nicely with existing reporting requirements. It's Excel-based and it does require your inputs, very plant specific, and we can use it to evaluate a range of different scenarios. Now, broadly speaking, it might be a complete replacement of all continuous flow sterilizers in a plant. So that'll give you your maximum potential benefit in terms of water and energy. You can evaluate replacing only a subset of units, or maybe just a single sterilizer, say in the boning room, maybe at the carton meat assessment or in the loadout area. And we can evaluate, you know, what if you used cold, warm, or hot water as the input to the Econoliser? How does that affect the various calculations? Now, here's a screenshot on the right of the tool, and together with the tool, we've prepared a user guide that goes through all the inputs and tries to explain them and where you might find the relevant information in terms of how to get the right numbers into this. So I just wanted to briefly show you what this actually looks like, and you should all be able to see my Excel-based screen now. Matt, can you just nod if you can see that? Righto. So the inputs are coloured in the Excel's input style, this lovely little orange. First input is that you've got to say where your plant is located. So you've got a little drop-down box, pick your location. The reason for that is that it only relates to the electricity that comes from the grid and the associated carbon emissions associated with that energy or electricity production. So that's really that's the only reason why we're asking where you're located. Then we've got a box for where you can specify the number of units, sterilizer units on the slaughter floor, as well as other sterilizer units that you might have throughout the plant. Now, they could be included, include any that you have in the offal room, the boning room, load-out areas, or any other areas. The difference between those two units, or the reason why we're keeping them separate, is that for slaughter floor units, we make an assumption that essentially you sterilize the knife once after every carcass, versus the boning room and other locations where you actually need to specify how often per day those units are used on average. For your continuous flow sterilizers, you need an input for how many litres per minute each of those units is using. And we've included a second tab here that allows you to calculate and actually do an audit of all your sterilizers and measure the water flow, maybe with a clip-on flow meter. And then it'll work out what your average flow rate is. And we split that by boning room and by the slaughter floor. The Econoliser, as we mentioned up the front, only uses about 140 mil on the default cycle. So that would generally stay unchanged. And then you've got to say how many hours a day you're actually running your continuous flow sterilizers. In brief, I mean, if we say what's your operating time for the plant, that might be 9 hours. Now, if you have people who turn the sterilizers off during breaks, you could subtract that. And if they're left on, you just leave it in. The number or your average daily kill throughout the year. And as I said, that ties in with the number of slaughter floor units, and then the number of times that the other sterilizer units are used on a daily basis. Now, that might be 500 times, that might be 10 times. One of our plants, one of the beef plants, they were sterilizing in the boning room at the pre-trim stand after every carcass half, because every time they were cutting something off. So, you know, for those stations, they would actually have, in this case, 1,000 times a day. And the sterilizer audit tab allows you to list the number of times that each of those units in the boning room and other locations, how often it might be used. And it'll then calculate an average for those that you can bring over and use as the input here. How many days a year that you're operating, because that determines how often you turn the sterilizers on. And then we come to some cost inputs. So you might actually need to talk to the accounting people or the finance people to see what the relevant numbers are. Now, the first one is the cost for water. Now, we've combined the cost for purchasing water as well as disposing of the water in your system. And we're making that assumption that if you buy a kilolitre of water, you're also going to dispose of a kilolitre, and the input here would be that combined cost. The user guide goes into some detail if you have lots of losses in terms of water and you only put out 50% of the water that you buy that you dispose of, just in case that is a situation with some people. But on the whole, it's just those two costs would be combined into one overall water cost. Then we've got your electricity cost in dollars per kilowatt hours. That's what obviously you're going to get from your electricity purchase agreement. And then we get to the heating source that you might have for your plant. Now, it seems that every plant just about has a different heating source. And the ones that we have listed here in the drop-down box are all those different heating sources that are listed in that measurement document by the Clean Energy Regulator. So you can just go through here and say, well, okay, we use liquefied natural gas, or we use heating oil or fuel oil or whatever it is. And based on your choice, it then calculates or looks up what the energy density is, and it can then calculate from there how much you need for heating of water and so on. Now, where was my natural gas distributed by pipeline? And then you need, of course, the cost of that particular heating source. Now, the reason why I've got some red text here and I've got this number in blue is because of the units that we require that cost to be specified as. It's in dollars per kilowatt hour. That's not a standard unit that you might get through your purchasing agreements and so on. But we have another little calculator on the side here where you can say, well, how much of that fuel source did I buy and how much did it cost? And then it knows what the energy content for that fuel source is, and it does that conversion into dollars per kilowatt hours for you. And the reason why this little cell is blue is because it looks up that value in that little calculator to the side. But if you know it, you can just type it in and overwrite that formula. It's no big deal there. The last few inputs relate to the temperature for the water that's coming into the plant. We've picked a default of around about 15 degrees. Now, it might vary throughout the year, but you can, on average, what is it? What you're heating the water to, and that usually tends to be quite a bit higher than what you actually need at the sterilizer, because there will be losses throughout the system. And neither your boiler nor your heat exchanger nor anything else in your system is 100%. So we've included a heat retention efficiency factor. What number do you actually put in there? We've picked a default of 70%. Ultimately, you could take a best case scenario and put in 100% and say all that heat, all that fuel that we use to heat water, that's all retained and delivered to our sterilizers. But that's probably a very optimistic output. Robin can probably tell you that some of the plants in Ireland or UK have done some work and they found efficiency of around about 50%. So a default of 70% seemed to be a bit of a compromise between those two extremes, maybe. And you can see what effect it has if you do some work to try and calculate those better. Then your water inlet temperature for the Econoliser unit. Remember that I said they could be cold water, you could use warm water or hot water even. And what the Econoliser heats the water to, the default I think is around about 94 degrees. So again, it heats that water in that reservoir just a little bit higher, because by the time it comes out through the sprays, it will lose a little bit of temperature, but at least that way it'll make sure that minimum of 82 degrees on the knife blade. So those are all your inputs. And then we have at the bottom here, the different outputs for the sterilizer units on your left, and the assumption that all those sterilizers that we've listed at the top, that they're replaced by Econoliser units. So for this particular, we say a representative plant maybe, or an example plant, it's not one of our trial plants as such. If they have 50 slaughter floor units and 10 boning room units with that sort of throughput and usage, they would use around about 130 kilolitres a day with the sterilizers versus 3.5 kilolitres a day if all those sterilizers, all those 60 were replaced by Econolizers. Over the year, that's of course a very big difference, and at their water cost, you can see what the difference in cost of water purchase and disposal actually is between those two systems. So those 60 sterilizers would cost you around about $120,000 in water versus the Econoliser, which is just over $3,000 in water cost. Now that water, of course, has to be heated, and using the plant's heating source, we've got a bunch of inputs and calculations here. So to heat that water would take about 15 gigajoules of energy at a cost of about $850,000 based on those particular inputs. And they're sort of, they're not outrageous inputs, I don't think. You know, they fall within the range of values that we've seen as part of this trial. In comparison, the Econolizers, they don't use your heating source. They only use the grid in this particular case, because we've used cold water as the input. And we, you know, based on that, it's just $13,000 in terms of cost for the Econo. So overall, you can see there's a very big difference of close to $1 million in water and energy versus about $15,000 in water and energy for the Econoliser. It's also got an effect on your carbon emissions, and that is listed down the bottom here. And those numbers are all based again on the Clean Energy Regulators specifications. Now, you might not want to replace all sterilizers that you have. Maybe you only want to replace one sterilizer in the boning room or in the loadout area that is used infrequently. So if we want to do that, we could say that all the sterilizers on the floor, we've got nothing to replace, and we've got one unit to replace in boning room or other areas. And if those other numbers are still the same, so, you know, that particular sterilizer was only used 10 times a day, maybe at the cut and meat assessment, 10 times a day, you find something that you cut off and then you need to sterilize the knife after. What effect does that have? Again, it's a fairly decent sized effect in terms of water usage, as well as energy cost, and your carbon emissions in this case almost doesn't measure because it's so low. If you said, well, look, that's fine, but putting cold water to that particular unit is going to take a lot more plumbing changes. What if we just plumbed it into the hot sterilizer water? Well, we can then change the input to, let's say, 82 degrees. And in this case, and it's not easy to see on the gigajoule side here, but it does use a little bit of heating from your traditional source, as well as some extra top-up heating to get that 82 up to 94 degrees. So there's a little bit of electricity used, and it does change the cost just slightly. Probably more easily visible if we change those numbers back to 50 and 10. So fit out the whole plant. We now have a slightly higher number. Remember, before it was about 13,000. Now the heating cost is higher because of your fuel source, that is per gigajoule or per kilowatt hour, is a little bit more expensive than electricity is. So there's a whole range of things that you can play around with in terms of this tool. So that's just a very quick overview of the tool, and I'm very mindful of our time here. Interesting, of course, is what's the payback time on this? Well, these particular trial units that we had included a bunch of different extras, including the mounting column and the temperature display, and we had temperature probes and the pressure little manifold included in this. So they came in at around about $7,500 after the exchange rate, including the shipping. For that particular scenario on the right-hand side, where someone might think about replacing a single unit in the boning room that's used very infrequently, these are our water and energy costs that we just calculated. And the total savings in that case would have been about $16,000. Payback based on that is around about 6 months. Very, very quick. But that's a scenario. If we look at one of our particular trial plants that had a very, very cheap fuel source, the savings aren't anywhere near as great. And in that case, it would take considerably longer for the payback. So really the message is we've got a tool. It is plant dependent, and it does depend on what sort of extras you want to include, and of course how many units you want to buy, because I'm sure that if you buy 1 unit, you'll get it at a slightly different price than if you want to buy 10 or 20 units. Right? So that's really pretty much everything that, oh, hang on, extra, read all about it. The latest news here was that one of our trial plants, based on the results of the trial, did it actually put in, and you guys know what this means, I have no idea, an EX26B application to the department. And essentially, as I understand it, it's so they can continue using the Econoliser instead of a sterilizer unit. And the news is that that's just been approved unconditionally, so they can use the Econoliser where they've been installed and at other places as well. So it really now has been accepted based on a trial with a plant that was using sterilizers. So, you know, it's all green light ahead as far as I can see. Which brings us to questions.
Thanks, Andreas. That was really good, really thorough. And so we've got some time for questions. I can see there's one person with their hand up now. David, did you have a question?
Yeah, no, thanks, Matt. Like the enthusiasm, Andreas, as well. Thank you. Quick one, the butt of the knife where the steel starts and the knife handle sits is quite often gets congealed fat compounded into it. The likelihood of that being removed in that spray wash have you looked at that?
Look, I should say not specifically, but those sprays, the current units, they have a spray that radiates up, and the that join does sit, so it does get sprayed with water. Now, Robin might be able to say more about new versions of the Econoliser that they're working on that has even more powerful sprays and focused on the blades. Do you want to say something, Robin, on that?
Yeah. The first thing is that with the unit that was used for the trial, you noticed in the still photograph that where the two white knives, the two knives with the white handles were sitting in to we call that the cradle that they sit down into, and the openings in the cradles are designed in such a way that about the first 10 or 11 millimeters of the plastic handle fits down below the cradle, and whenever the unit is spraying, you can see them sitting down, you can actually see that, you can more or less see the handles are going through it, and so they sit down this 10 or 11 or 12 millimeters depending on the blade or the knife, and they get sprayed with the water coming out of the nozzles. Now, having said that, it's not a high pressure spray, and since I was over in Australia, taking part in the trial, since I got back, we have sat down and now we haven't finished this yet, but we have it up and running and working. This is a prototype, but we're now instead of trying to do the 2 knives, which requires a nozzle with a fairly broad cone-shaped spray coming out of it, where there's no force, we're now having just one opening in the middle, and the nozzles that we use, either 1 or 2, depending on the length of the blade, they're much narrower and much more powerful, and they're directed at. They literally are directed at where the blade comes out of the plastic handle. So from the sort of experimenting that we've done with pieces of meat, basically, that we got out of an abattoir with big lumps of fat on it. Now any fat at all is removed, because it's a much higher, it's not like a power washer, but it's a much stronger blast of water that they're getting, and it's the water is over 90 degrees as well. So that's how it works at the moment, and what we have for the future. Hopefully that helps.
Yes, no, it does. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks for that, Robin. Is that you, John? Did you have something?
Yep. It is. Andreas, do you remember on numerous occasions saying to me, don't forget to make sure the sponge goes up against where the handle comes in?
Yes.
Which I did. So
yes.
The cups that we have take into account any bacteria that might be at the bottom of the handle.
Right. Very good. I had a couple of other questions come to me on the text and an email relating to the range of equipment for sanitisation that AirTech offers. So, question for yourself, Robin, is what other types of equipment for the slaughter floor or boning room, for that matter, does AirTech provide? And there's a second part to that question here as well. And have you got any guidance or around the adoption process or case studies from the UK around full adoption?
Yeah, well, I don't know who's pulling this up, but yeah, we do. We have,
that's me, Robin.
Struggle actually. You can hear me, okay? Yep.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. We now we have, I think it's around about 34 or 35 different sterilizers, for different tools. We have, I can't start and go into all of them, but we have most of the common ones covered. Cleavers, large and small cleavers, the vacuum tool used for removing the spinal cord. The other thing that we say to people is that if you have a tool that you need sterilized, and if we haven't seen it before, but there is potential for other places to have, that may have them, then we're more than happy to either adapt one of the existing sterilizers, because we can do that quite often, or we can come up with a design for it. We kitted out an abattoir up in Brisbane. Not sure whether I can say the name of the abattoir, but for them we had because it was the first econolizers was ever sold into Australia, and you have some tools that are unique to you guys over there. We had to design, I think it was four new sterilizers, which we did. So we know, because we've done it now so many times, it's not a big deal, to figure out how to design the sterilizer to accommodate the shape of the tool. And what was the second part about?
Just any from
about
the
examples
UK,
over here.
any case studies here.
Yeah, we have we have a whole lot of case studies from abattoirs over here. I don't know whether the guys are, you guys are familiar with the names over here, but we have a ABP, which is I think I'm right in saying the biggest abattoir group in Europe now. It's an Irish company with, I don't know, 4 or 5 of their sites now are completely kitted out. The Foil Food Group, Dawn Meats as well, Keypack. And then we have no big groups in Europe. You'll probably not be surprised to hear that after Brexit, things dried up a wee bit for us in Europe. But we've got some big abattoirs over there, the Vion Group, Goshawk, and people like that are using them. If the easiest way would be to contact us and let you know.
Yeah. Thanks, Robin. Look, if anyone on today's webinar needs to contact or talk further to any of the team, Robin from AirTech, the manufacturer, or John and then Andreas regarding the micro and the tool, etc., then please get in contact with your co-innovation manager at AMPC and we'll start a conversation around that. I think we're sort of, if there might be one more question. We might have a chance for one more question. Sorry, I'll just see who that is.
I think Langy had a hand up.
Sorry?
I think Langy had a hand up.
Yeah, Michael.
We put it in the chat.
In the chat. Have the results been provided to DAF? And is there approval or pending approval for the units to be used on a processing site? Well, I think you covered that on the EX26B application, Andreas.
That's exactly right. So that particular plant did provide the trial report that they received to DAF with that application, and that's all they've got the go ahead.
Well, which is really, really encouraging. So obviously adoption happening now as we speak, albeit not at full scale, but clearly there's a pathway there to full-scale adoption. So Michael's got his hand up again there, Michael. Do you want to say something else?
Yeah, sorry, I was just saying I did realise that there'd been individual approval. I was talking about blanket approval across industry so that it just goes through, which is what you were just starting to explain, I believe.
Andreas, you want to talk about blanket approval? What do we need to do for that?
I wouldn't have a clue.
I guess
that's above my pay grade, I think.
Michael, you want to add to that, or what some suggestions might be around more larger scale acceptance by DAF?
Yeah, no, I'll actually go back to Michael Johnson and have a chat with him about what needs to be done in that case. Right. I'm fine with going through at this stage as individual applications for each site that goes through, but it would be nice to have it so we didn't have to go through that at each site.
Yeah, good point, Michael. Thanks for that. So I think would like to thank today's presenters, John and Andreas, and also Robin Adair from AirTech manufacturer, who came out from the UK, from Ireland, to be at the trials in Australia. Spent a couple of weeks here in Australia, and it was good to have him on board, and he's got a good understanding for how we do things here. And so we've got a good team now from the trials to be able to help with anyone if they're looking at adoption, or as Andreas was saying, I mean, it's even an economic proposition just for one unit if you're looking for a permanent pilot before you go to full scale. So it looks eminently usable to me. So if there's no further questions or comments from anyone, I'd like to thank everyone for attending, and we'll be in touch again to talk about the Econoliser. Thank you.
Thanks very much, everyone.